Can you even shoot Derek laughed across the backyard, loud enough for every cousin, uncle, and neighbor at the BBQ to hear. My husband, Mark, stood beside the cooler and smiled like silence was loyalty. Emily, just let him joke, he said. Then Derek pointed at the old dog tags resting against my collarbone. What's that supposed to be? A costume prop? I did not raise my voice. I only tucked the tags back under my shirt. But beside the grill, an older man with a faded navy tattoo stopped pouring lemonade. His face changed when he heard Derek read the engraving. "Raven 6, he whispered. And suddenly, nobody was laughing. My name is Emily Carter. I was 38 years old that summer. And for most of my adult life, I had learned how to carry important things quietly. For 12 years, I served in naval intelligence, not as a pilot, not as a Navy SEAL, not as the kind of service member people immediately recognize from movies. I worked in operations support, the place where information, timing, and decisions could mean the difference between bringing people home and sending families terrible news. Most people hear that and think paperwork. I stopped correcting them years ago. After leaving the Navy, I settled into civilian life outside Norfolk, Virginia. I married Mark, started consulting work, and tried to build something ordinary. At least, that was the plan. Mark wasn't a bad man when I met him, but he had a habit that became harder to ignore with time. Whenever my military background came up, he found a way to make it smaller. Emily had a desk job. Emily was more administrative. Nothing dangerous. At first, I convinced myself he was simplifying things. Later, I realized he was protecting himself. The truth made him uncomfortable. My service represented a world he couldn't understand. And every year, it seemed to bother him more. His family was even worse. His mother, Linda, treated my military career like an embarrassing hobby. His cousin Derek treated it like a joke. If there was a room full of people, Derek needed to be the loudest voice in it. Every family gathering became another opportunity for him to remind everyone that he hunted deer, owned 3 rifles, and considered himself an expert on everything military, despite never serving a single day. Normally, I ignored him. That afternoon, I almost stayed home. In fact, I sat in my car for nearly 5 minutes before walking into the BBQ. A small wooden box rested on the passenger seat. Inside were medals, commendations, and service items I rarely touched anymore. I wasn't planning to show anyone. I wasn't even planning to open the box. But something about bringing it with me felt important, as if part of me was tired of pretending my life had never happened. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Please don't bring up the Navy today." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I locked my phone, picked up the wooden box, and walked toward the backyard. I had no idea that before the afternoon ended, someone there would recognize a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the backyard as relatives crowded around folding tables covered in red and white checkered cloth. For a while, I thought maybe the afternoon would pass peacefully. I should have known better. Derek was standing near the grill holding court, a beer in one hand and a story in the other. "And that's why you never miss at 200 yards, he announced loudly. A few cousins nodded, as if he were teaching a master class. Then his eyes landed on me. "Hey, Emily." The grin on his face told me exactly where this was going. "You were Navy, right?" I took a sip of iced tea. "Yes." "What did you do again?" "File paperwork." Several people laughed. I didn't answer. That only encouraged him. I mean, come on, he continued. Can you even shoot? The laughter grew louder. I heard Linda chuckle from across the table. Mark looked down at his drink. Not one word, not one sentence, just silence. The kind of silence that always hurts more than the insult itself. I set my glass down carefully. I never claimed to be a sharpshooter. Derek slapped the table. There she is. The most honest answer I've heard all day. More laughter. People mistake silence for surrender. I had learned long ago that it wasn't, but Derek had an audience now, and that made him reckless. He stepped closer. Let's see what military heroes carry these days. Before I could react, he hooked a finger beneath the chain around my neck. The dog tags slipped free from beneath my shirt. The small metal plates swung in the afternoon sunlight. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Derek picked one up between two fingers. Raven 6, he read aloud. He laughed. What kind of video game nickname is that? I took a slow breath. Put it down. Oh, come on. He turned toward the crowd. Listen to this. Raven 6. More laughter started. Then stopped. Not because of me. Because of the man standing beside the cooler. The older gentleman with the faded navy tattoo. The one who had been quietly talking with neighbors all afternoon. Thomas Hale. His expression had completely changed. The plastic cup in his hand lowered slowly. His eyes never left the dog tags. The color drained from his face. Derek noticed. What's wrong? He asked. Thomas took a step forward. Another. Then another. The backyard grew strangely quiet. Even the children seemed to stop running. Thomas looked directly at me. Not at Derek. Not at the dog tags. At me. And when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. That isn't a nickname. A chill ran through the crowd. Then Thomas asked a question nobody there expected. Lieutenant Commander Carter. He swallowed hard. Were you Raven 6? For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound in the backyard was the distant hum of traffic from the road beyond the neighborhood. Derek looked around and laughed nervously. Wait, you actually know her? Thomas Hale never took his eyes off me. Answer the question, he said softly. I stared at the dog tags still hanging from Derek's hand. A part of me wanted to walk away. Another part was tired of running from a name that carried both pride and grief. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. The reaction was immediate. Thomas exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. My God, his voice cracked. Mark frowned. What is this? Thomas ignored him. He stepped closer and extended his hand toward me. Not casually, respectfully. The way veterans sometimes greet people who understand things, civilians never see. When I shook it, his grip trembled. You probably don't remember me, he said. I looked at him carefully. The gray hair, the weathered face, the faded tattoo. Then something clicked. A memory, a photograph, a casualty report that had later been revised. Thomas Hale, I asked. His eyes widened. You do remember. The backyard had gone completely silent. Even Derek stopped smiling. Thomas looked around at the crowd. Most of you think Raven 6 is a joke. Nobody answered. It isn't. His voice was steady now. 15 years ago, my team was trapped outside Kandahar. The words landed heavily. I felt my stomach tighten. I had not spoken about that operation in over a decade. The mission itself wasn't what haunted me. It was the people who didn't come home. Thomas continued. Our communications were failing. Air support couldn't verify our position. Command believed the signal was lost. I closed my eyes briefly. I remembered the operations center, the glowing screens, The confusion, the arguments, the pressure. Most people wanted to shut down the channel. I didn't. I kept it open for nearly 3 hours. One decision, one stubborn decision, long enough to catch a weak transmission and identify a safe extraction route. Thomas pointed toward me. She was the officer who refused to give up on our signal. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. That decision saved lives. A cousin slowly lowered his beer. Linda stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Mark's face had gone pale. I looked down at the grass. I wasn't the only one involved. Thomas shook his head. That's exactly why she never talks about it. His eyes swept across the backyard. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. I was there. The silence lasted only a few seconds. For Derek, that was apparently too long. He forced out a laugh and lifted his hands. Okay. She helped with some operation years ago. That's great. But let's not act like she's some kind of war hero. Nobody laughed with him this time. Not one person. The absence of laughter seemed to make him nervous. He glanced around the backyard, searching for support. Finding none. He pushed harder. Come on. Anybody can make up a cool call sign. Thomas Hale looked at him with the kind of patience usually reserved for children who don't understand what they've just broken. Then he reached into his wallet. I was hoping I'd never need to show this. He pulled out an old folded photograph. The edges were worn from years of being carried. Thomas carefully unfolded it and handed it to Derek. The smile disappeared from Derek's face. In the photo stood a group of exhausted service members at a memorial gathering years earlier. Near the center was a younger version of me, and sewn onto my uniform was a patch. Raven 6, the exact words engraved on the dog tags. Derek stared at the image, then at me, then back at the photograph. A beer bottle slipped slightly in his hand. Across the yard, someone lowered a hamburger halfway to their plate. Nobody seemed interested in eating anymore. Thomas wasn't finished. Her name is Lieutenant Commander Emily Carter. The title landed like a weight. Mark looked down at the ground. His mother slowly sat back in her chair. Thomas reached into his pocket again. This time, he removed an old envelope. My stomach tightened immediately. I recognized it. Or rather, I recognized the military seal printed on the corner. I had never actually seen the letter itself. Thomas turned toward Mark. You remember this? Mark's face went completely white. The crowd noticed. I noticed. Thomas held up the envelope. This was a commendation letter, sent after the operation. A strange feeling settled over me. Thomas looked directly at my husband. It was addressed to Emily. The air conditioning unit beside the house hummed loudly in the silence. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Thomas continued. It thanked her for actions that contributed to the survival of multiple personnel. I swallowed hard. Then Thomas delivered the truth I never expected to hear. You told me years ago you gave this to her. Mark couldn't meet my eyes. Because he hadn't. For 15 years, I had assumed the letter had been lost. Now I knew better. The deepest wound wasn't Derek's joke. It was learning that the man standing beside me had hidden part of my own history. I looked at Mark calmly. You didn't stay silent because you wanted peace. His head lowered. You stayed silent because you never wanted them to know who I was. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. The backyard felt different now, not because people suddenly admired me, because the truth had finally taken up the space it deserved. Mark stared at the grass. I was embarrassed, he said quietly. The words sounded smaller than he probably intended. I didn't know how to explain any of it. I looked at him for a long moment. For years, I had accepted explanations like that. Not anymore. You didn't need to explain it, I said. You only needed to respect it. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Across the yard, Derek shifted awkwardly. The confidence that had fueled him all afternoon was gone. He cleared his throat. Emily, I'm sorry. Nobody came to rescue him. Nobody laughed. Nobody told him he was right. For the first time all day, he stood alone with his own words. I thought we were just joking around. I nodded once. I know. That answer seemed to bother him more than anger would have, because anger would have allowed him to defend himself. Understanding left him nowhere to hide. Linda finally spoke. I didn't know. There was genuine regret in her voice. But I was tired of hearing that phrase. People often say they didn't know. Sometimes what they mean is they never cared enough to ask. I wasn't interested in punishing anyone. I was simply done shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Thomas stepped forward and handed me the old letter. For the first time, I read the words written 15 years earlier. A formal thank you, a recognition of service, a reminder that difficult decisions matter, even when nobody sees them. My eyes lingered on the final line. Then I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the wooden box beside my medals. Not because I needed proof, because it belonged with the rest of my story. Thomas straightened his posture. Then, quietly and without ceremony, he offered me a salute. I returned it. No speeches, no applause, just respect, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. A few minutes later, I picked up the wooden box and headed toward my car. Mark called my name. I stopped, but didn't turn around. I am sorry, he said. This time I believed him, but belief and access are not the same thing. I need different, not sorry. Then I walked away. As the evening sun reflected off the dog tags around my neck, I realized something important. The truth had not made me larger. It had simply made it impossible for them to keep making me smaller. One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that your worth does not depend on whether other people recognize it. Some people will misunderstand your sacrifices, minimize your achievements, or judge you based on what they choose not to see. But dignity is not something others give you. It is something you carry within yourself. The truth may stay hidden for years, but that does not make it any less true. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you the most and where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about honor, strength, resilience, and quiet justice, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story.